There's something I've heard again and again over the years, that after a certain age, there are positions you just shouldn't do anymore. That bending down low is dangerous. That deep bending will damage your joints. And a lot of people believe this so strongly that they start avoiding those movements in daily life. But let me ask you something directly. If those positions were truly dangerous, why do we still see plenty of people in their 60s, 70s, even older, doing them without any real problems? I'm not talking about athletes or people who train all the time. I'm talking about regular people. People who go to the grocery store, sit and watch television, take care of their grandkids, people living lives that probably look a lot like yours. What I see in my exam room isn't a body that's too old. What I see much more often is a body that just hasn't used those movements in a long time. When a position stops feeling familiar, it starts to feel uncomfortable, not always because it's dangerous, but because the body isn't sure it can control it anymore. I've been practicing medicine for a long time, and most of my work has been with people over 50. I've seen many people avoid certain movements for years, not because they caused pain, but because they caused worry. And over time, that avoidance is what makes the body stiffer, weaker, and less confident. There's something I want to be clear about right from the start. When a position feels difficult or unsteady, that doesn't mean your body can't relearn it. Most of the time, it means your body hasn't been prepared the right way. And proper preparation does not mean forcing yourself, pushing too hard, or trying to muscle through it. In this video, I'm going to walk you through a clear, step-by-step, safe approach, no risky moves, no extreme challenges, just a way to help your body rebuild strength, control, and a sense of comfort with movements you may have been avoiding for a long time. So let me explain why this feels so hard for so many people, and why that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with your body. When I talk with people over 50, I hear the same comments over and over, just worded a little differently. I don't know if it's my age, but bending down doesn't feel right anymore. I used to do this without thinking. Now I hesitate. That feeling is very common, but it doesn't start because you suddenly lost the ability to move. It starts because your body hasn't done those movements in a long time. Think about what your daily routine has looked like over the years. You sit a lot, in a chair, in the car, on the couch, in front of the television. When you bend down, you usually stop halfway. When you stand up, there's a chair, a counter, or a handrail to help. Over time, the body comes to a simple conclusion. Moving in a small range is enough for everyday life. Going lower just doesn't seem necessary anymore. The body always adapts to what it does most. If you're not regularly bending at the hips, bending the knees, or balancing in lower positions, those abilities fade, not because you got older, but because the body stopped using them. Like any skill, if you don't use it for a while, it weakens. Here's where things start to go wrong. When a movement feels unfamiliar, the brain treats it as a risk. Then the body tries to protect itself. You lean back, the knees tighten up, the hips won't bend any farther, or you feel unsteady and reach for something right away. A lot of people assume these signs mean their joints are weak or their bones aren't strong anymore. Most of the time, that's not the case. It's a protective response. The body is trying to stay safe when it's not sure it has enough strength or control to go lower. I see this all the time. Someone walks fine. They handle stairs just fine, but ask them to bend a little lower, and the whole body tenses up. Not because of pain, but because they don't feel steady. And when that sense of control isn't there, the body takes the easiest option. It stops. So don't rush to blame age or assume something's wrong with your joints. These reactions usually mean the body isn't ready for that movement right now. And not ready doesn't mean never. Once you see that this fear comes from habit, not damage, your perspective shifts. Instead of thinking you need to avoid the movement, a different question comes up. If the body learned to avoid it, can it learn to control it again? And that leads to the next clear question. How do you teach the body that this position is safe? So what actually lets some people keep doing this movement as they get older? A lot of folks think it's about flexibility, that you have to be naturally loose, that you needed to be flexible when you were younger, or that it comes down to good genetics. But from what I've seen over the years, those things aren't what really decide it. What matters a lot more is control. It's about how the muscles work together at the right time. When you lower yourself down, the hips need to bend properly, the knees need to share the load, the ankles need to let the body move forward a bit, and the upper body needs to stay balanced. If even one part isn't doing its job, the body feels unsteady. That can happen even in someone who's very flexible. I've seen plenty of people who aren't flexible at all, but they have solid control. They move slowly. They know where their weight is. They don't rush. Because of that, their body feels safe. On the flip side, I've also seen people who are fairly flexible, but lack strength or coordination. When they go lower, they lose control, and the brain won't let them continue. That's why I always put control ahead of flexibility. You don't need to touch the floor. You don't need to sit all the way down right away. What matters is that your body knows where it is, what it's doing, and that it can stop at any moment. Looking at it this way also helps explain why people in some parts of the world keep this ability longer. It's not because they're born more flexible. It's because in daily life, they use lower positions more often. They rest lower. They bend down as part of their work. They balance closer to the ground without thinking much about it. Our daily life looks different. Everything is higher. Chairs are higher. Tables are higher. Beds are higher. Even tying your shoes often happens while sitting in a chair. The body learns quickly that it doesn't need to go low to get through the day. And when it's not needed, that ability slowly fades. This isn't about right or wrong. It's just habit. And habits can change if you take the right approach, not by forcing the body to do something it doesn't trust yet, but by bringing it back to familiar positions with better control. When you see it this way, things get simpler. You stop comparing yourself to other people. You stop thinking you're missing something you should have been born with. You're just helping your body reconnect with a movement it hasn't used in a while. So instead of forcing the body, you start by making this movement familiar again. If the goal is to make this movement feel familiar again, the starting point shouldn't be anything new or complicated. It should start with something you've already been doing every day for years, without giving it much thought. Think about standing up from a chair and sitting back down. You do that every day. When you eat, when you watch television, when you get up to go out the door, it's a very familiar movement. And because it's familiar, the body usually doesn't feel threatened by it. But if you pay attention, you'll notice a lot of people start relying on their hands, the armrests, or a quick push to get through the hardest part. Instead of that, we just change how you do it a little. You still use the chair. You can still use the armrests if you need to. But you stand up more slowly. You sit down more slowly. You notice where your weight is going. You feel your feet on the floor. You're showing the body that you're in control of the movement, not rushing through it. That sounds very simple, and it is. But that simplicity is what helps rebuild trust. The body starts to learn that lowering yourself doesn't automatically mean danger. You don't need to go lower than the chair. You're just doing what you already know how to do, with more control. Once that feels easier, the next step doesn't have to feel unfamiliar either. You lower yourself a little more, but with support, you might hold on to a table, a stair railing, or something solid in front of you. Not to pull yourself down, but to help you stay balanced. At this stage, the goal isn't depth, the goal is control. You lower yourself a short distance, you pause, then you stand back up. You notice how your knees feel. Whether your hips allow the movement, whether your upper body stays balanced. If everything feels okay, you might go a little lower next time. If not, you stay right there. A lot of people think that if they don't go deep, it doesn't count. But what the body needs first isn't depth. It needs to feel steady. When you hold on to something solid, The brain gets the message that support is there. And when the brain feels safe, it allows the movement to flow more easily. You don't need a lot of repetitions. You don't need to get tired. Just a few slow, controlled reps are enough to send a new message to the body that this movement isn't foreign anymore, that you're here and you're in control. I've seen many people start exactly this way. None of them began by going all the way down. They started by standing up and sitting down with better control. Then they lowered themselves with support, and over time, the fear faded before the strength even showed up. When your legs start trusting you again, improving flexibility gets much easier. Once the movement starts to feel more familiar and less tense, that's when we can talk about something else. And that's flexibility. Not to push yourself lower, but to make the lower position feel more comfortable when you're in it. One mistake I see a lot is people trying to keep their knees completely straight when they bend down to stretch. That usually puts too much strain on the lower back. Instead, let the knees bend a little, not much, just enough. When the knees soften, the hips can bend more naturally. The hamstrings and glutes get stretched, and the back doesn't have to do extra work. At this stage, you don't need to go deep. You bend until you feel a mild stretch. No pain, no jerking. Then you stop there. You breathe in slowly. You breathe out slowly. Each time you breathe out, you let the body relax a bit more. If it allows it, no forcing, no holding your breath. You're giving the body time to learn that this position isn't a danger. I see this all the time. When people lock their knees and hold their breath, the body reacts fast. Everything tightens up, but when the knees soften and the breathing slows, the tension drops. Not because the stretch is better, but because the body no longer feels like it has to protect itself. Another area people often miss is the ankles. A lot of focus goes to the hips and back, and the ankles get ignored. But stiff ankles are a common reason people tip backward when they go lower. The heels want to lift, the weight shifts the wrong way, and balance starts to feel shaky. To work on this, you don't need anything fancy. You start by paying attention to your heels. When you're standing, lean forward slightly and notice whether your heels stay on the floor. When you bend a bit, notice if the ankles allow your body to move forward. That's all. Just noticing when the heels lift and when they stay down. As the ankles start to move better, the difference is easy to notice. The body can move forward without tipping back. The knees don't take on as much stress, and you feel steadier in lower positions. Not because you suddenly got stronger, but because the joints are doing their share of the work. Pace matters here. You don't need to pull hard. You don't need to hold stretches for a long time. Just a few breaths. Just a small amount. The body learns best when it's given time, not when it's pushed. I've seen a lot of people feel a clear change just by adjusting how they stretch this way. Less tension, less fear, better balance. Nothing special. You're just removing small roadblocks you may not have noticed before. When flexibility starts helping the movement instead of getting in the way, you'll notice you don't have to brace as much. And that's when we move on to another important piece. Now let's talk about the muscles that keep you from falling backward. When people think about staying steady in a low position, they usually think about the thighs or the glutes. But there's another muscle group that often gets overlooked. And if it's weak, the body tends to get pulled backward very easily. I'm talking about the hip flexors. These muscles help keep your upper body forward in your center of weight where it belongs. When they're weak, every time you lower yourself, the brain feels unsure, and the natural response is to push the body backward to protect itself. You can start working with these muscles in a very simple way, right from a seated position. Sit in a chair, sit up comfortably tall, feet flat on the floor, lift one knee off the chair. It doesn't have to be high. Hold it for a few seconds, then set it down, switch sides. The key here isn't how high you lift the leg, it's how you do it. You lift slowly. You notice whether your upper body wants to lean back. You try to keep yourself steady, no jerking, no rushing. Each time you lift like this, Your body is learning how to stay balanced as your weight shifts. I see a lot of people do this too fast. They use momentum to swing the leg up. But when that happens, the brain doesn't get new information. When you slow it down, the body has to control the movement, and that's exactly what we want. As the hip flexors start doing their job better, you'll notice a change. Lowering yourself doesn't pull you backward the way it used to. You feel like you can keep your upper body where you want it. Instead of being pushed around, at that point, you go back to a low squat position, still with support. You can hold onto a table, a handrail, or something solid in front of you. The goal isn't to go deeper. The goal is to hold the position briefly, with control. You lower yourself to a level that feels okay. You stay there for a few seconds. No counting, no comparing yourself to anyone else. You just notice that you feel steady. Your heels stay on the floor. Your upper body doesn't get pulled backward. When you start to feel strain or loss of control, you stand back up. That's enough. A lot of people think they need to hold these positions for a long time to get results. But at this stage, confidence matters more than time. When the brain sees that you can go down and come back up on purpose, it slowly allows you to stay there longer, on its own. I usually tell people this. If you stand up and you still feel in control, still breathing normally, then you did it right, even if you only held it for a few seconds. If you push too far and have to rush your way out, the body remembers that tension. The strength we're talking about here isn't about proving anything. It's just there to keep you steady and upright when you need it. When these muscles do their part, movement feels lighter, less worrying, and easier to repeat. And by this point, something becomes very clear. It's not the people who do the most that improve the most. It's the people who stay consistent. And this is where consistency matters more than effort. When it comes to keeping this movement, a lot of people immediately think they need a complicated plan. How often? How many sets? How long each time? But for most people over 50, that approach doesn't last very long. Here's another way to look at it. Short, light movements that already fit into your day. Standing up from a chair and sitting back down. Lowering yourself a bit with support when you're near the kitchen counter. These are things you already do. The only change is you slow them down. You pay a little more attention, and you stop before you feel tired. These don't need to feel like workouts. They're just a reminder to the body that this movement is still a part of daily life. No changing clothes, no special space, just a few short moments. Done consistently, what I've seen over time is this. When someone can do a little each day without pressure, they're more likely to keep going. The body learns better when it isn't pushed into tension or forced to work too hard. Strengths still matter, but it doesn't need to be heavy every day. 2 or 3 days a week is enough. Between those days, the body needs time to recover, especially the joints. When the joints get a break, they usually work better the next time. On strength days, focus on how you move, not how much you do. Fewer movements, slower pace, more control. You don't need to train until you're wiped out. If you finish and still feel in control, that was a good session. There's also a small habit I often suggest. Each day, just briefly visit the squat position, not as a workout, just to stay familiar. Lower yourself a little. Use support if you need it. Then stand back up. No need to go deep. No need to hold it. The point here isn't strength. It's keeping the nervous system familiar with the position. When you show up briefly but often, the brain starts to relax around it. And when the brain isn't guarded, movement feels smoother. A lot of people think that if they don't go deep, it doesn't count. But for the nervous system, familiarity matters more than depth. Even a short visit each day still counts. When you combine light daily movement, moderate strength work during the week, and these brief squat touches, you build a rhythm that lasts, not exhausting, not stressful, but steady. And this is where many people lose their way. Not because they do too little, but because they do too much, too soon. And this is the part many people get wrong. There's a very common belief that if you try harder and train more intensely, the body will improve faster. For younger people, that can sometimes be true, but after 60, that approach often does the opposite. When the intensity gets too high, the body doesn't see it as help. It sees it as a threat. This is especially true when you go low, hold the position too long, or push through discomfort. That's when the brain switches on its protective response. Muscles tighten, joints stiffen, and movement feels heavier, not easier. A lot of people ignore the small signs. A little tightness in the knees, a shaky feeling at the ankles, breathing that suddenly feels held or shallow. They think they need to push through it to make progress. But at this stage of life, those signs aren't something to fight. They're information that needs to be listened to. When you train right up against your limit, the body remembers that feeling, and the next time it becomes more cautious. But when you stop just a bit earlier, before the tension kicks in, the body remembers that as a safe experience, and it's more willing to work with you the next time. That's why staying in a safe zone matters. A range where you still control the movement, where you're breathing normally, where you know you can stop at any moment. You don't need to hit your limit. You just move toward it, then come back. Some people think that means the work is too easy, but in reality, this is how the body learns best at this point. Without being forced, the nervous system has time to adjust, the joints have time to adapt, and strength builds in a steadier way. Patience here isn't about settling for less, it's a different kind of strength. Knowing when to stop, when to step back, and when to let the body rest. I've seen this over and over. When people lower the intensity, progress becomes more consistent. There's less pain, fewer setbacks, and most importantly, they stop being afraid of low positions. When you train this way, something interesting starts to happen. So what usually happens when you train this way for a few weeks? Nothing dramatic, nothing that jumps out to other people right away, but you start to notice some very real changes in everyday life. The first thing many people notice is better balance, standing on one leg to put on pants, turning around in the kitchen, stepping down off a curb. That unsteady feeling starts to fade. You don't have to think as much about staying upright. The body handles it better on its own. The next change shows up when you stand up and sit down. From a dining chair, from the couch, from the car. You don't have to gather all your strength and push in one big effort. The movement feels smoother, slower, and there's less strain in the knees and lower back. Another change comes when you bend down or reach for something, picking something up off the floor, reaching for a low shelf. Before, just thinking about it could make you hesitate. Now, that sense of fear is lower. You know you can go down and come back up without rushing. What's interesting is that these changes often show up before you feel much stronger. They come from the body trusting you more. The nervous system stays calmer, and when worry drops, natural movement starts to return. I see people surprised by this all the time. They assume they need more strength first. But in reality, once fear eases up, things are already halfway easier. These improvements don't happen overnight, but they show up steadily. A little this week, a little more the next, and because nothing feels forced, people tend to keep going. That's when you realize you're not trying harder. You're just being more consistent, and the body responds in a very practical way. And that's why I want to leave you with this thought. Age often gets blamed for why things slow down or start to decline. But if you look at what we've just talked about, you can see it's not that simple. The body does change over time, but it doesn't automatically lose the ability to relearn. If you approach it the right way, you don't need to do anything big today. You don't need a perfect plan. Just one small step, safe, within your control. That might be standing up and sitting down a little more slowly, or lowering yourself with support for a few seconds. That alone is enough to begin. What matters most is the experience you give your body. No tension, no rushing. When the body feels safe, it works with you. And when it works with you, Movements that once felt hard start to feel easier. If, as you try this, you notice even a small change, I'd like to hear about it. Maybe your balance feels better. Maybe you're less hesitant about bending down. Or maybe you just feel a bit more confident. You can leave a few lines in the comments. They don't need to be long, just something that reflects what you noticed. And if this kind of guidance is useful for you, you can follow the channel. I'll keep sharing simple, practical ways to help you move safely and steadily over time. Thanks for spending this time here. And remember, progress doesn't have to be fast. It just needs to be steady.